bit of a video for his uni project. Walking in the dark, oh so porn.
Are you an outsider?
I would consider myself thus, yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. Always have been.
Am I an outsider? Yes. In lots of ways I am. Have I always felt like an outsider? I've always felt different.
And I just wasn't there because I was filming her. I was totally just being a cameraman. I really wasn't. I didn't feel like I was that involved in being on the ride. But like every now and again, there would be some, like we'd go into the headwind, and you'd get tipped really far forward and feel a bit worried. And then
it's not something that I ordinarily thought about until people kind of started kind of making references to me actually being one, so it did make me think. But I think retrospectively, yes, I am. I've probably one of my earliest memories of being outside was at school when I was being bullied.
I feel like I've felt like that since primary school, basically.
I felt like I was in my own world, so maybe I did feel like different in that sense, that it was different to everyone else.
yeah.
You know?
I think it was in early childhood, like primary school age. Do you want me to look at you, or do you want me to?
No, you just do as you wish.
I think when you feel like you belong to a certain, I don't know where you've been brought up or whatever, there is a sense that I think like kind of gang feel, that sort of strength in numbers. I've never felt that, and I'm not. Interestingly enough, I bet if you asked most outsiders if they like team sports, they'd probably say no.
It never felt like a bad thing that I didn't quite fit. It was like, oh, it's just her. It's all right.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it wasn't.
My obvious willingness to be different instantly set me out from the crowd. It also made me a focal point, and that people can appreciate that in small doses. Yeah. But I think it then instantly gives them a reason and an easy target.
But not just at school, but also my family, having been brought up in a very strict, religious, right-wing, evangelical home, and knowing from an early age that I was gay.
The first and most obvious scenario was having spent time in Manchester and then going and visiting my old mates as such in Wales, and taking a friend of mine there and basically getting back and finding proper animosity and anger and violence towards us.
Situation in school of being excluded from whatever was being played, but also not wanting to be involved in whatever it was anyway.
I went to high school and it was like somebody had turned on a switch. Everything was different, and I was completely ostracised by my peers. My teachers didn't know what to do with me, and it was terrible.
Yes.
I had dens, I had places to go and spend my time. Places that I felt comfortable and quiet and was hidden from the rest of it.
But yeah, I think from really, really young till early adulthood, I guess, I never really felt like I belonged anywhere. Desperately wanted to belong everywhere.
And I remember being sort of singled out as gay at high school, and I remember not capitulating to that, not saying that I wasn't gay, but just finding those people and that opinion completely irrelevant and letting it be obvious that was the case.
I know there's been times, and not even that long ago, where I've really tried to fit into a place and realised that actually, no matter how much I try, I've already been judged, and I don't think I ever will properly fit.
I've recently had a friend who's posting things on Facebook about some white van man shouting abuse and following him home because he was saying that, he knows that he's crazy and that he looks different, and he said, well, that's the exact reason I love you, because you're not the same as anyone. You are crazy, you are all these things to say, but we take these things to mean something that is really very positive.
Even further than calling it an imagination, I'd call it a really strong internal life. And I was like that when I, played with the two neighbourhood girls who lived down the road and my sister. I was always the leader. I was always spinning the tales and creating the worlds that we played within. That's always continued, which would be the reason why, I'd never walk into a room and I'd dance instead, because I'd hear music on it.
Yeah, quite often I would make up stories and to tell the other kids, to tell these like fantasy stories, and I'd have everyone around listening, and I'd be the one that would make up these games for everyone to play, and I would have my little army of minions.
So I'm always, if anyone's new to a school or new to a place, I'm like the first person. I literally can't help myself to go and speak to them and make sure they know where everything is, and they don't necessarily become my best friend. It's not about that. I feel like a sort of buffer between their isolation and the rest of the world at that time.
It was my second last year of school actually, because I got into a play, but it was a really exclusive, very difficult play, and I was the only one of my peers, the only one of my year to be in there. And I remember these girls and I remember they were really cutting and hideous about it. And I was talking to one of the boys, and he said, I've just realised you are the only one of your year that got into this play. That means you're better than your peers. And it was like a release. I don't know if it's necessarily true, but it's certainly, I had that moment of, yeah, fuck you, see ya.
Because he was saying that, he knows that he's crazy and that he looks different, and he said, well, that's the exact reason I love you, is because you're not the same as anyone. You are crazy, you are all these things they say, but we take these things to mean something that is really very positive.
In my family, my dad died when I was a baby, and my mum and my brother were always very close and very similar, and in many ways I was the more kind of sort of independent and separate from them. So I guess in many ways I've kind of felt like I've always been the outsider. I've kind of felt like I've always been the outsider. I've kind of felt like I've always been the outsider. I've kind of felt like I've always been the outsider. I've kind of felt like I've always been the outsider. I've kind of felt like I've always been the outsider. I've kind of felt like I've always been the outsider. I've kind of felt like I've always.
Well, I just decided I didn't want to be part of the group when they behaved in that kind of snidey way, you know. I remember getting locked out of 9 Thorpley, although I do remember getting locked out of 9 Thorpley Road. You know, that everyone else was playing in, you know. A breath on the window steamed up to make a sign. It said Wanna. You know, everyone else was playing inside. And I climbed up to the window and their breath steamed the window up, and in it they wrote Wanna backwards. So I could read it, obviously. The thing that snags it, that my mind goes over, is did he know he'd left the K out? Early grasp of irony, even, like understanding that I'd enjoy the misspelling and whichever, it was perfectly judged. Flipped it over and over again. I've gone over and over it, perfectly judged. Not bothered by it, really, but held in rotation by it. Nevertheless, as a child, I told myself that they excluded me because I didn't need them. I needed the group the least. You know, I don't know whether that's true or not, but it's certainly how I first understood my outsiderness.
But because there's one thing I've never stood for, and that's really kind of, you know, bullies or nastiness. I don't think it's necessary.
Like, on numerous occasions I would stand up for, like, try and stop fights and stop aggressive people.
I went to a Catholic all-girls convent boarding school.
You know, there was a drunk man kind of verbally abusing his daughter, trying to take her home, and she was crying on the street.
It wasn't so far away from Dunblane. I must have been about 15 or so when the Dunblane massacre occurred.
And he was like shouting and screaming at her and wouldn't let her pass.
It was after our break time, and we were all waiting for our teacher to arrive in the classroom.
He'd obviously gone to pick her up from school, or shouldn't have been at school or something like that.
It was just absolutely white as a sheet, and she went straight over to the telly and turned it on.
And everyone was just standing in shock and looking.
It's Dunblane massacre. So we sat and we must have watched it for about sort of 20 minutes.
And everyone was just standing in shock.
You know, multiple children had been killed by one man who'd then turned the gun on himself.
But nobody wanted to do anything or say anything.
And it wasn't clear how many were dead. It wasn't clear if he was dead.
And I just walked straight across the road and stood in between them and didn't say anything, just put my hands up.
But there was a lot of rhetoric around you know, that everyone seemed to sort of feel that he should live so that he can pay for his sins.
And stood there until other people came over to try and calm the situation down. And
I sat and listened to it for quite a while, and it was just really starting to really bother me, and eventually I said, that's wrong. It sort of got around the school that I'd said this, that I thought that you know, that there should be some sort of understanding and forgiveness for why someone would behave like that.
And that was completely instinctive for me to do that.
And yeah, that was a real sort of point in me where I just sort of went, these are not my people.
I think probably my sexuality made me an outsider, because I knew that there was something that had to be suppressed. That by the standard it was wrong, it was evil, it was a sin. I did feel a sense of isolation from that.
Okay. Well, in all the cases we've seen here, the primary coincident factor is the sense of alienation in childhood. And whether that comes from some underlying mental issue or a hostile environment, alienation is the primary coincident factor. It seems that there are certain guiding factors to how that alienation is experienced, such as whether there's a supportive and loving familial environment or not, but essentially you're born into that alienation. There's nothing you can do. I mean, sometimes you're born in the wrong place at the wrong time, like being born English in rural northern Wales, or being gay, or just being unusually imaginative. Whatever the guiding factor is, you're set outside from the outset and there's nothing you can do. It's not all bad though, as within the alienation sometimes can come a sense of the flowering of the individual, in the sense that it sees itself as a tower of the landscape rather than part of it, that a view its surroundings, often dispassionately. This can lead to a useful detachment or mindfulness. I've also found outsiders eschewing the morality of the group for a stronger internal structure, like a moral compass that steers them away from negative group behaviour. For instance, if there's a group aggression, the outsider would rather walk away from the group and be judged by them than partake in their bullshit. And this often results in further alienation, of course. It's a judgment on your peers, and it's taken that way. Ready? Oh.
The outsider, when imagining her own death, fails to see the world continuing, seeing only her own ending, and with it the world. Consensual reality played no part in her decision making. My obvious willingness to be different instantly sent me out from the crowd. Not squeezing into boxes. But also my family, having been brought up in a very strict, religious, right-wing, evangelical home. The shape of the unknowing, being met with proper animosity and violence. Unknowingness of the world, being excluded, but also not wanting to be involved. Not allowing that unknowing to become anxiety. From really, really young, I never felt like I belonged anywhere. I desperately wanted to belong everywhere. Or just seeing the anxiety and calling it what it is. Those people in that opinion completely irrelevant. An unwelcome and readily dismissed part of reality that you control. Because he was saying that, you know, he knows that he's crazy and that he looks different, and I said, well, that's the exact reason I love you, is because you're not the same as anyone. You are crazy, you are all these things they say. Consensual in only as much as it needs her consent to be there. I've already been judged. Where opinions are like pigeons will change when she's made to step in any direction. Quite often I would make up stories, these fantasy stories that have everyone around listening, and I would make up these games for everyone to play, allowing them to break up and dissolve into the nothing that surrounds them. I feel like a sort of buffer between their isolation and the rest of the world, cooling like evaporation.